Thanks a lot for having us here. It's a great crowd. Keep this interactive, less boring. Again, my name is Michelangelo Sidani. I'm the CTO and founder at NopSec. And today we're going to be talking about the 2016 State of Vulnerability Risk Management report. This is actually a report we run twice a year. We basically take all the statistical information that we get from our vulnerability risk management software as a service solution and a bunch of customers across several industries, and we aggregate it, and we analyze the result. And we have also Jordan Dominguez, our data scientist, that is going to talk about the result in depth. And just a little bit of an introduction out of the marketing piece. I started my career like 20 years ago in penetration testing, and what I usually back then was about getting a bunch of scans, getting a bunch of reports, and gathering vulnerabilities. Was more focused on gathering a lot of data and a lot of vulnerabilities rather than the quality of data and which platform and asset and business impact those vulnerabilities will play into each client's environment and each organization. So for me back then was all about analyzing 300 to 500 pages report and go from page 1 to page 300 to really extract the needle on the haystack, much like every other penetration testers in the industry, that they have to sit through this massive amount of data and really extract the exploitable vulnerabilities and the vulnerabilities that sits on the kill chain. So the kill chain, the chain of events that goes from first getting on a network on interacting with a web application all the way to compromise the entire system as well as the data in the entire environment. So for me, it was all about automation, and so basically that's what we did. What we did at NopSec, and the way we did it, basically, we see it in this way. So we totally scanner agnostic. We ingest all the data, and what we did, we incorporated the expert penetration tester rule of thumb in evaluating vulnerability in an expert engine. And what it does, it takes each vulnerability and based on the environment is able to decide, okay, this vulnerability is the right risk level, not following the CVSS score, as well as is this vulnerability correlated with public exploit? Is this vulnerability present in current attack from a hacking group as well as malware? As well as is this vulnerability affecting the key infrastructure in my pieces in my organization and application? So after we do this, we're able to kind of boil down and prioritize vulnerabilities so you can basically focus what it mattered the most. Again, we talked with a lot of folks introducing again the state of vulnerability program. And we feel the vulnerability management program a little bit, stuck in the past. So people scan for the sake of scanning. Okay, I'll buy scanner X, Y, and Z. I press the button. I get a big report. I don't understand what is in the report. I put it in a folder waiting for the auditors. Well, this is a little bit of what we see. So for scanning for compliance, and also the progress is measured by the number of vulnerability I detect. I detected 300, 500, or 10,000 vulnerability, depending on the size of the network. This is the measure of successful vulnerability management. Also, the prioritization is based on the CVSS score, which is a score associated with the CVE, Common Vulnerability Enumeration, which is basically is a score that goes from 1 to 10. And usually for PCI compliance, it has to be you have to focus only on vulnerabilities that are 4 and above, right? Right. But by the way, we're gonna demonstrate that vulnerability even below 4 are totally legit when you chain properly and compromise networks as well. So like basically, if you combine this the large kind of app and the improper prioritization, you get like the result with a huge information overload, much like the information overload I used to experience when I was starting in penetration testing. And the antidote for this and the solution for this is really the risk-based vulnerability prioritization, which is I think we very much pioneered in the industry, and the bigger scanner guys they now follow suit, which is a good news because they basically in the industry we all cooperate with each other. So like the most important thing is like not the number of vulnerability, but what vulnerability are like much likely to lead to a breach, or in the event of a breach, what attack can cause the most damage. Again, like at the beginning, I mentioned that one of the input of our algorithm is the business impact of each asset. Right? Each asset has its own value. That's the most important thing. So I'm gonna leave it to Jordan, our data scientist, that is gonna go through like a very, very thoroughly about the data and about the entire analysis. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. Can everybody hear me? Is the speaker working? Okay. Yeah. All right. Awesome. So I'm going to start by giving an overview of our data. We collect data from a variety of sources, and we put it all together to help our clients understand the threat landscape that they're facing every day. So we start with client data, and this is scanner output, which, as Michelangelo said, can be hundreds and hundreds of pages. So we bring in all of these vulnerabilities. We have over 1 million unique anonymized client vulnerabilities in our data set. And we define a unique vulnerability as a combination of a CVE, which is kind of the weakness enumeration, the vulnerability enumeration, but also the information asset that this vulnerability is located on and the port that it's on. And the reason why we do this is because we think that the situation that a vulnerability is present in is just as important as the intrinsic factors of this vulnerability. So if a vulnerability is located behind a firewall and the same vulnerability is located, on a client-facing website, there's a huge difference in risk between those two things. We also correlate all of our vulnerability information with things like public exploit information from the exploit database, Metasploit exploits, malware feeds to know really what vulnerabilities are getting attacked today by malicious exploit kits, vendor patch data, common weakness enumerations, and social media trends. So we put all of this data together, and we kind of realize that this data itself has enormous value to people outside of our clients and outside of our organization. And so that's why we put together this state of vulnerability risk management report. So what this is we want to give, first of all, an overview of the threat landscape. So what threats are different industries facing? What do they have in common? Which vendors are vulnerable? Are they the same for different industries? Are they different? Insights on vulnerability risk. So we take a look at kind of current measures of vulnerability risk, and we talk about whether those are adequate or not for risk prioritization. And then, what other measurements we can use to help improve scoring systems and risk evaluation. And finally, we put all that together for some guidelines. So what this is not, this is the section on data disclaimers. I'm a statistician by training. At NopSec, we really try to hold all of our research to really the highest standards. So we want to tell you guys the results from this analysis are not from a random sample. It's a convenient sample of our clients. So what that means is the possibility of some kind of sample bias does exist. So we can draw some really interesting conclusions for our clients, and we think that they do point to great guidelines for organizations outside of just our clients, but it's something to keep in mind. This is not all-encompassing. We're not going to give you, these are the 10 threats that everybody will face, and there is nothing else out there, because anyone else who tries to claim something like that is selling you something and maybe doesn't have a great idea of what the threat landscape looks like. So despite these drawbacks, I should also note we're not an intrusion detection system. All that means is that we have information on weaknesses located on our client systems, but we don't necessarily track potential intrusions. We do this because intrusion detection systems tend to be rather noisy, and so for the purpose of statistical analysis, they can be difficult to use and to analyze. But overall, we still think that this offers some really important insights, some great actionables, things that you can do today to help your vulnerability and risk management. So jumping right in, the first thing we did was looking at common vendors across industries. And we were trying to answer the question, which vendors are particularly vulnerable for clients in different industries? So we went ahead and measured this by getting the median number of vulnerabilities per client that came from each vendor. And you can see the results over there on that graph. A few things to notice. Microsoft dominates across industries. This isn't super surprising. Microsoft is a giant company. They make a ton of products, and we think that this speaks more to the prevalence of Microsoft across all sorts of clients than it does to Microsoft being a super vulnerable vendor. But we also notice that there's some other vendors that pop up for different industries. So we see things like Adobe popping up. We see VMware for some clients, and we see Mozilla for clients in the financial industry. So these are application level vulnerabilities. And application layer vulnerabilities are particularly important. It's something that came up over and over again in our analysis, and something we'll talk about more. But what this really tells us is that companies need to do a really good job keeping track of patches that are available for all the applications across their systems and really integrating that into their patch management and risk management systems. So overall, this indicates widely used products by industry, but maybe not so much vulnerable vendors.
What's the x-axis? What does that mean?
So that x-axis is the median number of vulnerabilities per client in these different industries. Yeah, and we took the median, which is a measure of like where 50% of the data lies. So 50% was below, 50% was above.
Jordan?
Yes?
How did you determine, or why did you determine that VMware is an application? Like, I would tend to think of that as infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we call VMware an application because it does depend on kind of application type patch management. So if VMware releases a patch, you have to say like, okay, VMware released this patch, we need to install it. So that's kind of it's a very broad classification of application, I agree with that,
Okay.
but that's why.
Thanks.
So in this chart, Microsoft under insurance is reaching 400. What does that mean?
That means that the median number of vulnerabilities that our clients had on their systems was 400. So that means if you said like, how many vulnerabilities does a typical client have from Microsoft? This is our measure of that. So, and this is, again, I want to point out, is vulnerabilities per asset. So this is across all of their assets. They have 400 Microsoft vulnerabilities. So next we looked at weakness analysis. So we did a really similar measurement. We took the median number of vulnerabilities per client in different industries, and we took what's called the common weakness enumeration. So this is kind of a grouping of each vulnerability into a specific weakness that it shows. And so, again, we measured it by clients in different industries, but this time we saw kind of the same weaknesses popping up over and over and over again. So permissions, privilege, and access control dominated across industries. This was a weakness that we found on really every client system. We also found things like buffer overflow and improper input validation very, very often on client systems, as you can see from that graph. And again, this really highlights the need for application layer patch management. You're going to hear me say that a lot. And that's because improper input validation is a really, really common application layer weakness. So companies really do need to stay on top of what patches are available, new releases, and even though it can be really, really difficult to kind of keep integrating new releases in, it's incredibly important from a security standpoint. So overall what we saw is that the last time in the last slide we saw different products appear in different industries. So vendors vary by industries, but every industry deals with exactly the same kinds of weakness. These things like permissions, privilege, and access controls, improper input validation. So industries have a lot more in common than they have that's different. So next, we are a threat prioritization or a vulnerability prioritization company. So we wanted to assess what the current measures for prioritization are. And if you're starting from kind of level 0, trying to build up a vulnerability management approach, you would start with the common vulnerability scoring system. How familiar is everyone with the common vulnerability scoring system? Should I go over it? Yes, no? Okay, I'll go over it very quickly. The common vulnerability scoring system is an effort to measure exactly how risky a certain, how much danger a certain vulnerability poses to an organization. So it looks at things like the exploitability, which it breaks down into some factors I'll talk about in a second, and also the impact. So those are the two big subscores that go into the overall score. Unfortunately, the common vulnerability scoring system has some flaws. One of the big flaws is that the vast majority of vulnerabilities on our client systems are rated as 9s or 10s. So if someone says, okay, let's look at all the vulnerabilities we found in our system, you know, the 10s are probably really, really dangerous. I'm going to narrow it down to those. I'm sure there's not that many. There's actually a ton. So weighing all of these vulnerabilities with equal amounts of risk, all of these 9s and 10s, kind of has the practical effect of prioritizing nothing. You're left exactly where you started. And you can see that if you look at the median scores for different clients. So especially in the financial industry, the median CVSS score for vulnerabilities found on their systems was a 9.3. That means that 50% of their vulnerabilities are rated a 9 or a 10. So using that doesn't help narrow it down at all.
Is that because,
Yeah,
is that because the technology industry is that much more diligent versus the financial industry, or is it just the nature that most financial companies are B2C, and most technology companies are B2B, and therefore, I'm just trying to understand why there's such a huge discrepancy.
Yeah, well, we did notice overall that technology companies do have kind of higher rates of remediation, and we do think that that probably has something to do with the fact that technology, first of all, developers are maybe a little more aware of security and things like that, but it's difficult to draw conclusions just from our sample. So it could just be that our financial clients tend to have a lot of really risky vulnerabilities and our technology clients don't. But what this does demonstrate is that, at least for our clients in the financial industry, the CVSS score is not sufficient, and our software helps them kind of sort through this monster pile of critical vulnerabilities that they have. Yeah, so I told you that we would break down the CVSS score. Here it is. This is the CVSS Exploitability score. So this score attempts to measure what is the likelihood that an attacker could actually exploit this vulnerability. And they measure that by breaking it down into 3 categories. So there's authentication. Does exploiting this vulnerability require single authentication, multiple authentication, no authentication at all? There's access vector. Can you access it just on the same network, like via a network? Do you have to be local? And then there's like adjacent, network adjacent. And then there's access complexity. So, you know, given that you have everything else that you need, how difficult is it? Is it low, medium, high amount of complexity? So in theory, this sounds like a great way to measure exploitability. But again, it's fairly flawed. 46% of vulnerabilities that have been assigned a CVE and a CVSS score have the absolute highest exploitability score. So 46% of these vulnerabilities should be like super easy to exploit. In contrast, we have found that less than 5% of vulnerabilities are incorporated into things like exploit kits and, you know, present like a real danger to our clients, a danger today to them. So furthermore, the exploitability subscore is a pretty bad differentiator between what is and isn't dangerous. So these pie charts over here are a breakdown. Each column is a subpart of the exploitability subscore. And then each row, one of them represents all vulnerabilities, one of them represents vulnerabilities with a public exploit, and one of them represents vulnerabilities with malware out there. But if you look at these pie charts, they all kind of look the same. So that's kind of what we're trying to demonstrate here, is that it's a really bad differentiator. On the other hand, if you look at the CVSS impact subscore, that actually measures if somebody exploited this vulnerability, what would happen? What would the damage to our company be? So it's measured along 3 axes: availability, integrity, and confidentiality. And overall, only 20% of vulnerabilities would result in like a complete loss of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But when we look at exploit kit CVEs, we see that 75% of those have a complete loss of data. So in real world terms, what this means is I'm an attacker, I'm looking for a vulnerability that I want to exploit today. I don't look so much at how hard it's going to be. I look at the impact. I look at what I can get out of it. And this really makes sense if you think like a hacker. That's one of our mottos, think like a hacker. It's about return on investment, right? So it doesn't matter if I can exploit this vulnerability in 2 seconds if I get nothing. And it doesn't matter if I have to put in, you know, a month of work to exploit this vulnerability if it's going to get me millions of dollars worth of data that I can sell. So that's kind of a really big part of evaluating vulnerability danger. One of the last things we looked at was social media correlation. So recent research indicates that social media is actually one of the biggest ways that people disseminate proof of concept exploits. So that's both the good guys trying to get the word out there and bad guys looking for plausible deniability if they actually exploit something on a client system. So if you look at the median number of tweets, again, we see all vulnerabilities have one tweet, in the median number. So most vulnerabilities are only tweeted about maybe 0 or 1 times, but vulnerabilities with active malware have 18 tweets associated with them. So social media correlation is actually a really excellent way of differentiating, and it's NopSec is really the only vulnerability prioritization company that incorporates tweet counts and social media buzz into their formula.
So are you aggregating that data? Are you collecting that data, looking at so you mentioned the CVE?
Yeah, so we do look at it looking at the CVE, and we would love to find a better way in the future. It's definitely something we're looking into, but for now that's what we have, and we've shown that it's actually a pretty good differentiator on its own. So finally, you see the before and the after. This is before. Vulnerabilities in our client system, CVSS score, lots of 9s and 10s. After our technical risk score, which is what we calculate, taking into account all of these factors, we see the vast majority of vulnerabilities are rated as not particularly dangerous to the client today. And we have a very small segment of vulnerabilities that are very dangerous. So these are things with exploits out there, things that are exploited by exploit kits, things with a lot of social media buzz. And so we help our clients choose a small number of vulnerabilities to focus on. So finally, we to dive into a little bit more this idea of exploit kits, what is being actively exploited in the wild. We partnered with FireEye, a leading intelligence firm, to investigate some of the CVEs that they had found are commonly exploited. So analyzing these, we found a few interesting things. First of all, the vast majority of the exploits that they look at happen on Oracle or Sun Java, Adobe, and Microsoft. This is probably because those are 3 of the largest vendors of products to clients, and hackers and people who create exploit kits are looking to target, cast as wide a net as possible. So these are really the software, the vendors that people are targeting. The next thing we looked at was just breaking it down by exploit kits. So we also collect data on which vulnerabilities specific exploit kits work into their software. And we found that Nuclear and Angler, these are the 2 at the top, have the largest number of exploits. So of the CVEs that we were given by FireEye, we found that they incorporate 25 and 20 of those.
How do you aggregate this information? I mean, some overlaps with limits. A lot of things could be happening in unison. So how do you get that number?
So this is based on the CPE, the Common Product Platform Enumeration. So sometimes there are vulnerabilities out there that have multiple platforms that can be affected by that. So in that case, we would see that it would be counted both towards Linux and Sun. So there is some overlap there, definitely, but this was just looking at overall what platforms are vulnerable to different exploit kits. So in conclusion, clients across industries have really similar security weaknesses. They have more in common than they have that's different. Risk-based vulnerability prioritization is the information overload antidote. If you have a 500-page scan report, that's not very helpful when it comes to really remediating vulnerabilities today. But if you add just a little bit more data in there, you can really get a handle on what does present a threat to your organization. The CVSS score, as we said, is a really incomplete measure of risk. It's critical heavy, and that poses a big problem for a lot of organizations. So some vulnerability management must-haves include taking into consideration the impact of a vulnerability, looking at social media correlation and public exploit information, as well as malware data. And so we do all of those things in our Unified VRM platform to help automate this process. All right, thank you guys so much.